Morning. Good morning, Love Light Ananda. Welcome to the broadcast. Also, welcome all y'all who I can't see yet. Swag Vegan, it's been a minute. Welcome to the broadcast. Glad you can make it today. Got a couple of things on the agenda. So, just so everybody knows, this dry period with my channel is likely going to continue. I've begun actually the writing process on this new project that I'm working on. Um, yeah, a new project that I'm working on for a main stage production that's going to be produced in Brooklyn. That bring like the history of like Black economics and the early civil rights movement and celebrities and Harlem folks and all kinds of fun stuff together in a what I'm calling a 360 theatrical experience. And when I say 360, I mean from the time people walk into the theater building itself. Good morning, Michael and Raw. From the time that people walk into the theater itself until the time they walk out the door, they will be immersed in this experience. I have no idea if this is going to work. I don't know if people are going to be mad because there are certain things that people expect when they go to the theater. There's certain things that people expect when they go to the theater, and one is the sort of like this ritual at the end where we say, "Oh, it was just a play. Oh, thank you," and everybody claps and stuff like that. And so I'm trying to imagine like what happens if we create a theatrical event that doesn't include that kind level of catharsis, which is a kind of a cathartic moment. It's not like in the Greek sense catharsis, but it is certainly a type of catharsis. Trey Legal, yeah, I hope so. But you know, there's also something very disturbing about to think if people were marshaled out of Michael and Raw, thank you for 400 likes. If people are being marshaled out of the theater before they've had a chance to resolve the issues of the play in having the actors bow and say, okay, it's not, because the reality is. That the issues that are going to be addressed in the play are issues that are still relevant today. And my hope is that people walk out of the theater and like want to get back in to the experience, and they'll get back into the experience by going home and doing some reading or like immediately going and talking to some friends. So yeah, not letting them off the hook. It's interesting you say off the hook because also in the next 2 weeks on the 15th and the 16th of December, as a matter of fact, Falcon Works, which is the theater company that I founded a long time ago, is going to be presenting our off the hook shows. And the off the hook shows are another way that we kind of don't let the audience off the hook. In the off the hook shows, we have young people that write plays. They write these plays based on the issues that they see in their community. And then in that moment where everybody's clapping and being like, oh, that's so cute, the little kids wrote plays. They're not that little, but they're teenagers. But when everybody's going, oh, we're so proud of them, then we actually step in and say, hey, but they presented all these issues in these plays. What do you think about that? What does that mean that these young people are seeing these and that these are the issues that are impacting these young people in their lives? And so then we start a discussion with the audience. And sometimes we step into forum mode, which is where we'll have people who have advice to offer the young people about how to deal with these issues that are in their lives. We offer them the opportunity to step on the stage, and then we have the actors go back into the scene. And now usually it's an adult who will, come up with the way that they would deal with the situation. Usually they use kind of magical thinking, and they transform themselves into the person who's usually causing the problem, and then, try their way to convince the young person to, do this thing that wasn't really in their best interest anyway. It's very, very interesting, especially when we do plays around education, because although many of the educators that will be in the audience and the parents alike will agree that the education that we're providing these young people is inferior, usually they will step in as the teacher and say, yeah, but do it anyway, right? As opposed to trying to figure out with the young person how they might transform that system into something that's not inferior or something that is at least useful. So Mike on Raw, wrapping up my workout at the gym, says Mike on Raw. Well, that's great. I hope it was a fun workout. I hope you did cool things. Um, I actually, I don't know if I mentioned that Ms. King has been, oh, Ms. King, y'all, I cannot wait for y'all to see Ms. King. Ms. King was the second person that I featured in the convertible series. Now, because I wasn't seeing Ms. King every day. It wasn't like with Ethan where I was able to do updates on Ethan's progress. But I do have an update coming up for you all with Ms. King's progress in becoming vegan and completely just transforming um, her lifestyle post cancer treatment. And so, yeah, we're going to be hearing about Ms. King. So that's that. Um, so working on this play, yeah. And in the working on this play, obviously, you know, I start doing research and start learning things and start like having all these moments of just like, oh no, so they taught me all the wrong things in school. They taught me all the wrong things in school, but I was the fool who didn't go and like I didn't go and check. I didn't do. You know, you go to school, you trust your teacher. You don't go back behind your teacher and do fact checking. But I think everybody should do fact checking behind their teachers. Whatever it was that you learned in school, go do some fact checking. Let me see what else is going on. What else is going on? Trey Legal says, I experience that daily. And I think that you're talking about that moment of just like, oh, I should have checked the facts. So much is going on. I think last week somebody mentioned that I had been talked about on someone else's YouTube channel. And I was like, do I want to go and find out what this person said? And I was just like, you know what? No. Because, and so I almost made a video. I almost made a big rant. I was this close, y'all. I was this close to just dragging everybody, dragging all of y'all. I was about to drag everybody. And here's why I was about to do some dragging. I've been so busy that I can't even make videos. And meanwhile, I'm watching all these other people's making these videos that are, you know, some people are making great content, you know. I love Matt Blender, welcome to the broadcast. Speaking of welcoming to the broadcast, I just want you to know that the next Pedagogy and Theater of the Oppressed conference is going to be in Indiana, Pennsylvania, Indiana borough, which is pretty close to Pittsburgh. And I know that that's not right next door to where you are and where Sister Vegan might be, but I can guarantee you that when that conference is happening and I am in that town I'm going to be there for the whole thing because I'm on the planning committee, so I'm going to be there for the whole time. I'm going to be basically right about 20 minutes outside of Pittsburgh, 20 minutes like in your direction, so that 20 minutes closer. So I'm probably going to be about like 2 hours from you. We got to meet in the middle. We have to meet in the middle. Yeah, bring everybody, so we can. And so let's plan on that. So yes, I'm glad that you're here, Mad Vegan. But y'all, I was ready to drag people. And here's why I was ready to drag people. I am so sick and tired of, you know, these videos that are like, well, the left is doing this, right? I cannot. First of all, Redneck to Vegan is here dressed up in a Redneck to Vegan suit that I'm like, what's going on? How is, like, first of all, to what do I owe all of this brilliance? So first of all, everybody, welcome. My thinking is that the title of this video is what grabbed everybody's attention. So I'm gonna jump in, y'all, and I'm gonna let you know where I'm coming from. So two things that I want to talk about today. What did they say? What did they say? I'm gonna get to all of it. So Love Light Ananda, I don't know what they said. I didn't check. But generally speaking, I'm really tired of this like this volleying back and forth. This political volleying back and forth that is about like who's worse? Is it the regressive left? Are they the worst? Or is it the conservatives that are terrible and what the bad things that they've done? And so I want to just talk about take a deep breath. I want to take a deep breath and go back in time and establish ourselves. And first of all, you know, y'all know that I don't mess with the state that much. First of all, I don't want the state to be mad at me because when the state gets mad at you, it ain't cute. It ain't cute. Weird stuff starts to happen in your life, and the next thing you know, you've gone. So I'm not trying to mess with the state. But I also don't, I try not to depend on the state for too many things, right? And so, I work in non-for-profit, but in the work that I do, I try to do like a much more of the kind of grassroots fundraising so that the work is being funded by, people that I can go in and I can say, hey, here's why, it would be important to fund this work. So I'm talking like on the local level, on the city level. So I get a certain amount of money from the city to do this work. And so I can actually, those people can come and see the work and verify that the things that we're doing are having an impact in the community. And that's number one. It's like, what are these people doing who are like doing all this trash talking? And I talked about this a little bit last week, right? I vote for people based on the what I believe will be the material improvements in my own life, right? And the people that I care about, right? So what are the material benefits that we are going to see voting for these people? And so there's so many like, and I keep mentioning Candace Owens, keep mentioning Candace Owens' name. And partially because Candace Owens is one of these folks who's been running around talking about vote Republican because the Democrats thing for you. Like Candace video talking about, well, the only reason that, black people vote Democrat is because of the 1967 Civil Rights Act that was passed by John F. Kennedy. That is analysis of why black people vote Democrat. And first I want to say, Candace, you didn't do your homework. Now, I'm not saying that Candace is necessarily wrong, that is not one of the reasons why. Y'all have to excuse me, I'm putting a little, I got a little of the, I don't know if you can see, it's too bright, but it's a little argan Moroccan oil. I'm putting it around my mouth because my mouth tends to get a little dry, a little ashy in the winter. Okay, bringing it back together. Okay, here we are. So, Candace Owen, Mad Blender, thank you for the 400 likes. So Candace Owen is going on talking about how, black people don't have any reason to vote for Democrats because there was nothing that the Democrats have done for them other than passing the law that made discrimination illegal. It's a big thing. Why don't play it off as small, right? And let's not pretend that was like that John F. Kennedy just woke up one morning and said, you know what, I'm going to pass a law that says that discrimination is going to be illegal, right? I'm going to make it like against the law to discriminate against people, particularly based on the color of their skin, which was happening. It was written into codes in states all over the country, right? That blacks couldn't vote, had to pay taxes to vote, all kinds of things, separate, couldn't go to the same school, couldn't drink water at the same fountain, right? We all know about those things, right? But we also have to understand that it was not just John F. Kennedy waking up one day and saying, let me pass this law because I think black people are so cool. No, it was a lot of work that a lot of people put into that, a lot of grassroots work that went into that. And some of that grassroots work was being done by Democrats all over the country, Democrats who likely, were brown-skinned Democrats, or if not, they were Democrats that were voted by black people, and on the promise that they were going to try to make these material improvements in the lives of their constituents, right? So, Redneck to Vegan is saying, I've removed myself from the public social discourse that has all people in a fervor think and act in a positive way toward all, spread love. I hear you, baby, and I'm getting to that. And this is where we have to talk about works. We have to talk about works. But I'm going to get into this discourse because I said I was going to, and I don't want this to just be clickbait. So, a thing to keep in mind, first of all, Republicans love to talk about the fact that, Lincoln freed the slaves. So we had this, and people love to talk about the fact that people went to war to free the slaves, to end slavery, and I do not want to belittle anyone's blood. I don't want to belittle anyone's blood, right? Because people did shed blood to see slavery come to an end. There were a lot of other things in there, but I'm going to say the popular belief, and that was your everyday soldier poor person who signed up, who was in there in the trenches actually getting shot at and shooting guns, not the political elite who were, saying go that way, and this is what we're going to do. But the actual people on the ground, the popular belief was that they were freeing the slaves, right? But also that means that on the ground, there were people in the South who were actually fighting to maintain the institution of slavery. So when we're talking about the fact that there were a bunch of people who were fighting to free slaves, we also have to admit that there was a segment of the population who was fighting to maintain slavery, right? So you can't get one without the other, which is an ugly picture, right? That we were divided enough as a nation that there would be people who thought it was worth killing another person, their brother, to maintain Africans in this particular institution, which was horrible, right? So, and the Republicans did that, right? And it was also the Republicans who, codified into law the 13th Amendment, which made slavery illegal unless you were convicted of a crime. There was the 14th Amendment, which formally makes blacks or African-born blacks citizens of the United States. And then you have the 15th Amendment, which gives blacks political rights, the right to vote, right? And so right after these things, you actually did see improvements in the lives of black people. You had black people who were elected to offices. So you saw, yes, these were not small things. But the one thing that they forgot to do after they freed the slaves was pay them for all that work. They forgot to pay them for all that work. Okay. They didn't pay any damages. They didn't pay any damages. Okay. And so popular belief or popular mythology leads many to believe in what was called 40 acres and a mule. So, we look at the Restoration period and 40 acres and a mule. So every former slave or every former slave family, I don't know, was given 40 acres and a mule. Okay, first of all, and for the vegans in the house, this will be a relief. What happened was General Sherman, okay, there were a number of African Americans who kind of followed General Sherman out, were following General Sherman. And General Sherman passed Field Order number 15. And Field Order number 15 was a temporary order that gave recently freed Africans who were basically refugees the access to islands, mostly off the coast of Georgia. This wasn't farmland. These were some islands that were not in use, and those were conferred on black people. About 30,000 blacks benefited from being able to live on these islands, mostly off the coast of Georgia, right? So at least they had a place to be. Now, they didn't have a job. They didn't have any tools, right? They didn't have any money to buy any tools, but they did have access to a little bit of land, 30,000. There were 4 million freed slaves, 4 million blacks who got nothing. So you got 30,000 on the one hand that did get, it wasn't 40 acres. It wasn't 40 acres for everyone. There was some land, some little plots of land that were given to some black people. They were able to live there, right? 40 acres, get that out your mind. And if you've ever seen 40 acres is cute. It would have been cute to get 40 acres, but there was no 40 acres. There was never anything codified into law giving ex-slaves 40 acres. That did not happen. Right. And the mule part of it was because the troops, as they were leaving, they had some mules that they had been using as like work animals. They didn't really have any use for them. They were going to ride on their horses. These mules, it was going to be more of a burden for them to keep them, so they donated some mules. Everybody didn't get a mule, okay? So, and I'm going to say this, as a vegan, it's kind of cool to know that, animal exploitation wasn't tossed in there as part of this whole thing. Although, I'm going to tell you that in a lot of the strategies that have been used by Africans to pull themselves out of slavery, we know, especially when we talk about the diet, African American diet, that a lot of animal products are in there killing people. But I just wanted to be clear that when we talk about, like, why we're in the state that we're in, and like how grateful Black people should be to the sacrifices that were made in the segment of the population that did fight to end slavery, when you look at the fact that those slaves then were left, okay, they ended the institution of slavery, but then, you had a whole bunch of people who were left with nothing to do, right? What did happen was they paid $100 to all those slave owners. So if you, per head. So if for each slave that you had to free, you got $100, right? What was codified in the few months after slavery, one of the first acts of Johnson in the Restoration was returning land to former plantation owners. Yeah, right. So land, sit down, thank you for becoming a fan. So yeah, so just let's be clear, y'all. Let's go back and like starting at the end of slavery, we saw Black people freed, but freed into the abyss, y'all. You were freed into the abyss. So you didn't have a place to go. You didn't have any money. You didn't have any tools. 4 million people. Imagine how many 4 million. 4 million, right? So most of those folks turned right back around, went to the plantation that had just been returned to their former owners, and went to work, basically for free. And we have the beginning of sharecropping, right? So, well, those of you who don't know sharecropping was not just something that that Blacks did in the South, but poor whites as well. Sharecropping meant that you were generally given a loan to purchase some tools so that you could work the land of your former owner or someone. And you spent the year doing what you needed to do to have a crop. Usually a third to half of that crop is what went to the farmer, and then 50% or more went to the plantation owner. So at least half of what you did was going to the plantation owner before you saw anything. And then from what you had left over, you had to pay back that loan for whatever tools. And if you went to the commissary at any point during the year to get food or whatever it was, and often this is what would happen. And so you had people who were basically existing under debt peonage, which was, going to jail because you owed money. But instead of going to a prison, they were kept on the plantation. So you went from slavery back into slavery, y'all, because there was no option. For 4 million Blacks, there was nothing else to do. Right? So, and also the state, and many of them were Republican lawmakers in the states, passed laws that made it illegal to be without a contract at the beginning of the year. So if you didn't have a contract as a sharecropper, you could be arrested. And then once you were arrested, guess what? According to the 13th Amendment, you could be put to work as a slave. And so then we have the development of the convict leasing program. So you had all of these. Suddenly, we went from having a penal system that was a few 100,000 whites to millions of Blacks, right? Which is what we have now, right? We have 2.5 million people. We have a million and something, half of them being people of color, right? So that's how that happened, right? And so if we trace that back, there are things that you can look up. There's a film that you can get to on YouTube actually called Slavery by Another Name, and you could also watch the film. I believe it's Ava DuVernay's film 13, if you want to know more about that, right? So yes, Love, Light, Ananda is talking about the prison industrial complex. Redneck to Vegan says, kind of reminds of me of our current situation, just modernized. Right. So in fact, it is our current situation. The situation that we're seeing now is the result of all of that work. Here's the silver lining, though. All right, so with all of that, so when people talk about what the Republicans did, I don't want to hear about that, right? Because the same Republicans that, were the party of Lincoln were the same party that passed these who did nothing when they had the opportunity during Restoration to institute a policy like, the 40-acre policy where people could get access to land. Did not do that. Returned the land to the former plantation owners, who were then able to exploit their former slaves as cheap labor and often free labor. In fact, free labor, right? So don't want to hear that. And then slowly over the course of the next century, in the 1900s, you see the passing of legislation that would physically bodily protect African Americans from some of the crimes that were being perpetrated against them. And these are, I believe Truman is responsible for some of them. Obviously, Lyndon Johnson is responsible for some of them. FD in some of the New Deal programs did benefit African Americans as well. So you saw from Democrats a series over the next century, a series of policies that did have material effects, were material improvements in the lives of African Americans. Why do I focus on African Americans only? I don't know, baby. Why do people focus on video games? It's my subject of choice. I don't know. But here's the thing, is that I'm not actually focusing on African Americans only. If you think about it, I'm not focusing on African Americans only. I'm focusing on the United States and the way this particular society has been structured. And that structure has a lot to do with the way labor has been exploited from the founding of the colonies to today. So it is not simply a focusing on blacks. It is a way to look at a huge chunk of the system, of the way that America has been structured. And to ignore that ignores why we're in the situation that we are in today. Right? And these mechanisms were not only mechanisms that were used against Africans who had been enslaved, but they were mechanisms that were used against poor whites, which is another part of the story. Yes. So, the question to ask would not be, why do I focus on African Americans only? But why is the story of African Americans so crucial in understanding the story of America? Right? The story of America. So that's a great question. It's a great question. I'm glad you asked. But it's also something that I find very interesting, because a lot of these stories are things that from my childhood, right? These were things that I heard about from my childhood, and I was confused. I was like, I actually did. I thought my family was racist, because they're like, the things that they were telling me couldn't be true, could not be true about their experience with white people, right? Right. And so that's the other thing too, is that I'm not just talking about African Americans. Who's doing all of these things that I'm talking about, right? To think that I'm only talking about African Americans is to deny that there were actors, right? So Better United by Trade Unions and Common Interest Group. I'm here. I am here with you, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So what we want to talk about is and this has to do with the work that I'm doing right now, how did Black people respond to the situation that they were in, right? The situation where, instead of being the primary source of the economy, like the engine of the economy in the United States, they continued to be an engine in the economy, but there was a more global economy that was taking off. And so blacks in some ways were kind of shifted to the side. And what many people think is like, well, then why didn't black people just do what it was that they needed to do to kind of get themselves on their feet? And this is another thing that history seems to forget, is that African Americans, from the time they got to the colonies, engaged in all kinds of collective economic activities, cooperative economic activities. And that includes the way people bought themselves out of slavery. It certainly includes the way people dealt with the issue of sharecropping. So what you had happening were blacks would pool their monies. They would, instead of going to the local commissary and buying from the plantation owner, they would go to a major city, or they would send someone to a major city to purchase in bulk so that they had huge discounts. They were getting things at half the price that they would have been paying if they had bought from the plantation commissary. And so suddenly you had people breaking out of that cycle of dependence on the cycle of dependence on the plantation owners. So Trey Legal says, racism is a tool used to exploit workers. Evolver M says, call me old-fashioned, but for me, it's the worker that is the basic target of exploitation. Yes, of course. Of course, workers are the basic target of exploitation, but you can't ignore that the basic target of exploitation in the United States for the first 300 years that the country existed was Africans. I mean, it would be foolish to talk about that. And then what does a country do when their main workforce is taken away from them, right? What does the country do? So to understand why we are where we are, it's important for us to look at history, right? Because if we're not looking at history, then we're believing in the modern in the rhetoric that we hear about, this one is lazy and this one is evil and this one is that, right? We have to look and see exactly how these structures were put in place and the functions that they served, right? So it's not simply Veganista, welcome to the broadcast. So it's not just a matter of saying, hey, what happened? But why did it happen, and how was it useful to the political elites, to the ruling class, to structure the society in the particular way that it was structured, right? And for those of you who were with me last year when I was working on Ready, Set, Go Race, you know that even the invention of race as it exists in this country was a social control mechanism, right? So compared to physically controlling slaves, financial control is much less cumbersome and more effective across a larger scale. Yes, I would agree with you 100%. And that economic control, so you had slavery, and during slavery, you still had to economically control poor whites, right? That was certainly a consideration. And after slavery, you also have to figure out how to now economically control poor whites and poor African Americans and poor anybody else. Right? So that's what that is. And then the second part of the title, y'all, I know I talked a little bit about like this whole idea of like what is, American Islam. And what's really scary is when you think about the way people talk about Islam and fundamentalism and how frightening it is and terrifying it is. It's really hard for me to hear that conversation because I don't judge white people the way that I hear some people judging Muslims. But one could if one chose to be illogical, right? If one chose to be illogical, you could say, well, the United States was founded on racism, right? It only operated and was able to function, was only able to maintain the institution of slavery for 300 years because of racism. Right? Because of a belief that those people who were enslaved were, somehow naturally inferior to the rest of us, right? And so racism becomes a very real thing, a very real control mechanism that continues to be deployed in our modern society. to maintain a division between working class people, so poor working class people and poor working class white people and poor working class black people. And so, yes, if we want to have a talk about unionizing, if we want to talk about collaboration between races, we have to acknowledge the fact that there are, these two races and that they have been played against each other in very, very particular ways and start to do things a little bit differently, right? And that takes work. It's not simply a matter of saying, well, it's over. No, you actually have to work to undo these things. There needs to be a period of unindoctrination or re-indoctrination for people to understand what happened in the United States. If slavery had always existed up to then, why was racism needed to be invented? Well, slavery has existed, right? But what happened in the United States was a very, very special thing. And I think that is some research that you could do, but I'll give you the basics of why racism was needed in the US. Slavery that existed in other cultures was not necessarily based on race. So if you had the slavery that we're talking about existing, say, in Africa and in the Middle East, you might have other people who were looked exactly the same as you, right? So those people, because of a war that happened, were captured and they were turned into slaves. And this even happened with people from the Middle East going into like parts of Europe and taking Christians and bringing them. Generally, what happened in those societies is once you converted to the dominant culture. So if you were a Christian and you were captured and you were turned into a slave, once you became a Muslim, you would be freed from slavery. If you were African and you were, in a battle with another tribe and you were taken captive and you were made a slave, eventually you would just be absorbed into that tribe. Right? You were just absorbed into that tribe. And so that there was a real understanding that, first, that person is being, we're having a fight, we're having a war with them, and that person is our enemy because of their belief system. And then once the belief system was changed, then that person could be absorbed into the culture. The problem in the United States was you had these two sections of the population that were both being exploited at the same time. You had poor whites and you had poor blacks. The problem was, if those poor whites and poor blacks worked in solidarity, they would overthrow the ruling class. And that would be a bad thing for the ruling class. So the ruling class found they needed something to act as a social control mechanism. And what they did was they enlisted poor whites to be the social control formation for enslaved blacks. So that is why racism becomes so important in the United States, right? Because there was the particular way that they had to control two different groups that they were exploiting at the same time. So yeah, you have white people who were being exploited, and then you have a super exploited class of black people, right? So you have whites exploiting whites who were then in turn given license to exploit blacks. And that's what happened after slavery ended. So you have this group of, plantation owners who you wouldn't necessarily call them the ruling class. They were basically, demoted to the state of like landowners, right? But they were the ruling class over blacks who had recently been enslaved. And so for the next 100 years, they have to maintain the same caste system to be able to continue exploiting African Americans. But like I'm saying, with that indoctrination, could be seen by some as the same kind of indoctrination that, people who are Muslims or radicalized Muslims, right? So in the same way that you have this very violent way of responding to people who are not you, right? And this is what we see, Islam and the infidels, what have you. Okay, and I'm being very, very general here, but we hear it. You know what you hear, right? And I don't believe any of this stuff, so I'm not invested enough to get it right. I'm not invested enough to get it right. I'm just putting it out for you. One could say that in the invention of whiteness and white supremacy, which is what exists in the United States, that same radical element exist. And we've seen it play out over history, right? So in the early 20th century, we saw riots around the United States that were usually white violence on black communities. It happened in Chicago, it happened in New York City, it happened in New Orleans, it happened in Connecticut. It happened in Tulsa, Black Wall Street, right? And that's the thing, is that when we saw Black people responding to the conditions that they were in, the material conditions that they were in, and using cooperative economics to deal with these things, then we saw whites release their wrath on these communities because there was not going to be a rising middle class in the United States. It just couldn't be. And that had everything to do with the indoctrination, like from centuries before, right? So all that to say, it's not just feelings. It's not just feelings, right? There are truly actions that have been taken to have material effects on the lives of people in this country, right? That, we got to deal with, right? We got to deal with that. But I think it becomes very, very unfair to focus our energy on the shifts that need to be made in communities of color in terms of the entire society, when most of the society is made up of, white people. More than half of the population is white people, right? And so how to get white people on board with understanding the country's history, and how to get white people on board with the way that they need to be working closely with people from minority groups, right? If they want to build solidarity, right? But that's work that has to happen, right? And some of that work requires an understanding of what has happened historically, where you are, why you are where you are, and how to get someplace else. So that's all of that. But there's good news, because that's where projects come in, right? So in Detroit, and one of the reasons I love Detroit is that the conversation is not so much around like, what are we fighting against, right? So like racism, yeah, we'd be fighting against racism, we'd be fighting against all kinds of draconian policies, whatever it is, right? And we could spend the rest of our lifetimes organizing simply in that way, and waiting for someone else to figure out what it is that they need to do so that our lives can be improved. That's not the rhetoric in Detroit, and that's not the rhetoric that's happening in a lot of places. A lot of places are doing what we call visionary organizing. And visionary organizing is saying, okay, so if this is broken, what can I do instead? Not what can I get someone else to do, but what can I do instead? And so you have the solidarity economy. You have people developing worker cooperatives and consumer cooperatives and producer cooperatives, right? All over the country. And this has been happening, over the last century, earlier. Right, all over. But we see these things on the rise. And we also see people being intentional about the way that they build community, right? So looking at the way that people are having an impact in their own communities by making drastic changes. So if your community doesn't have a recycling program, how do you start a recycling program? Or how do you maybe not create as much trash to begin with? Right? How do you consume less? And how do you do that not just as an individual? Because one of the issues is looking at it as something that the individual can do. And it's not, that is a big no. This is not no person can transform society on their own. These things must be done using collective action, right? Because I'm not going to be able to provide everything that I need. We need to do some of that collectively, right? Clean water, access to clean water is something that needs to happen collectively, right? A food system is something that needs to happen collectively. At least if we have to have agreements about, what happens if I go out in my yard and grow food, right? We have to have agreements about what's going to happen with that food. And either it's going to be like all for me, and so I need everybody to agree not to eat my food, or maybe that we agree that we're going to, do things in a way that we can be growing more food because we're doing it collectively, and we have better equipment to we have better farming equipment that we can use because we don't each have to have it. We can buy one that we can then use to work in on everyone's plots, right? So looking at ways that we can start to work collectively. But again, these things don't just happen. These things have to happen in a space where where there is some deep analysis about why the world is the way it is. And if I'm somebody who goes around believing that the status quo is going to get us to the future that we want, then we're going to have problems. Right? Love, light, and Ananda. I love that you say we should have an agreement that we should have clean water, right? If we don't have an agreement that we should have clean water, I mean, look at the water supply now. We don't, we all likely would say we want clean water, but, people go and dump into our water supply, and we allow that to happen, right? And so what do? Matt Blender says, yeah, I understand what you're saying. It's frustrating. I just really think there are a lot of people who don't have a clue. So that's another thing about the education programs that are necessary for us to have a different understanding of the world that we live in. It really isn't enough. First of all, it's not going to happen on YouTube. It's not going to happen on YouTube. It's not going to happen on YouNow, right? We know that, right? This work happens with people coming together in place in their communities and having conversations about the things that are important to them. And trying to, as opposed to like turning on the news to get the answers to everything, trying to figure out these answers based on the situations that you are in, right? So I love that there are a community of us that exist, who come and people show up and listen to me run off at the mouth for an hour, and you agree with things that I say, you disagree with things that I say, you troll me, you love me, whatever. All of these things happen in this space, but what really needs to happen is what the work doesn't start. This isn't where the work starts. The work starts when each of us has the courage to say, okay, what am I going to do like on this block, on my block, to make sure that I'm taken care of, my children are taken care of, my family, my loved ones are taken care of. But how do I expand that reach in a way that it can start to have some real impacts on the community that I live in? Lychian says, history in the US about Black people is often taught as white saviors giving Black people freedom, not from this perspective. That's, and I think, yes, I'm going to agree with you, but that's also because, we're not getting our history. We're not asking our parents, I shouldn't say we're not asking because I don't know what other people are doing, but like, are we asking our parents and our grandparents what happened? Are we asking them to tell that story? And are we believing that story, even if that story is not verified by the Encyclopedia Britannica or by our teacher at school? Do we have enough trust in the people around us to believe the experiences that they share with us about the world? Or do we keep trying to base our understanding of the world on ideologies that are perpetuated through these mechanisms, through the public education and the television and the church and, capitalism and all of these things, right? Right. So Alberto says, do you like social justice warriors? There's no such thing. Come on, let's forget that, right? This is that stuff that I was talking about at the beginning, right? So like, again, if the rhetoric is about who thinks wrong, I don't like the way that person thinks. What is that person doing? What are the actions that people are taking in their communities? The people that you admire on YouTube, what have they done for you lately? And what have they done for the world? What initiatives are they a part of? Did they start, like a consumer buying club, with people in their neighborhood to be able to get better rates on groceries? Are they doing ride shares? Are they doing block cleanups? Are they making sure that the senior citizens in their community are taken care of? Are they making sure that the young people in their communities are safe? Are people just sitting up in their house with their Xbox or whatever it is, going like this, pum pum pum, getting that high score and getting as many, subscribers on their YouTube channel or on their Facebook or on their Instagram or Twitter, right? Is that what we look at nowadays as accomplishment in terms of transforming the world that we live in so that it suits our needs, right? And I'm not even saying that, it doesn't have to even be a big dream, but just like making sure that everybody can be safe and get some food and have shelter, not freeze to death in the winter, right? What are people doing, right? And in what ways? In what ways? Let's not just talk about it as like, oh, I like this person and what are people doing? What are they doing, and what is the impact that it's having on the world, for better or worse? Not just who like trashed who, called who out. Like, this is so much of what I see happening, and this is what I was talking about at the beginning that had me wanting to rant. I'm like, you can, and this is why I was just like, part of me was like, one of the things I wanted to say was like, I will get on here with anybody. I was so upset that, Dave Rubin, who is not any, I realized that Dave Rubin isn't a real person. You know what I mean? As far as a real person, I thought Dave Rubin maybe was a real journalist because I don't follow those things. I don't watch TV, right? I do my work in the real world, right? I do my work in the real world. And so I know who the people are that are doing things that are having an effect on the people around them because I see it. I see it on the street. I see it on the sidewalk. I see it when we come together, right? I see that people are either taken care of or they're not taken care of with my eyes, right? Not just based on what people say they're doing, right? So don't trust me. Don't trust me. You go do. You go do and make your world, right? But I was really disappointed because Dave Rubin recently had this Red Pill Black and Blair White together, and they just were yelling back and forth, and I was like, that's not real journalism, and that's not doing anything. And if that's what people worry about, if that's what people are worried about, man, they must be living high on the hog. I hate to say it. I hate to say it. If that is what people are worried about, they must be, I hate to say it, they must be part of the problem. They must be part of the problem. Stephen Gerard says, it seems that the more connected we get via social media, the less connected we are in the real world. Yeah, it might be. That might be the case. Right? Alberta says there are a lot of SJWs out there. Who? Count them. Who? Who's an SJW? See, you can't even answer the question. People can say, I love it. People can say anything, but they can't, prove it. Prove it. Which is why I don't even want to play that game anymore. What is happening on your street? Is everybody on your street safe? Right? What is happening on your block? What is happening in your neighborhood? And if you can't tell me a positive story about that, and you're not doing anything, then I don't care. I don't care how many viewers you have or how many subscribers you have on your channel, because you're not doing anything in this world. And I'm sorry, I am no longer one to say, but we're providing. No. When I get on the telephone and talk when I get on the telephone and talk to my friends, what I mean? I'm not doing any more for the world right now, talking to you on this live stream. This is for my pleasure, and this is for all of our pleasure. But in forms of transforming society, that doesn't happen during this live stream. That happens when we get off this live stream and we make the decision to do something for the world, And a lot of that has to do with, how many people are we taking care of? How are we caring for ourselves, and who else are we taking care of? Because if we're not doing those things, we're not really doing anything, right? We're not doing anything. So the political conversations, yawn, right? Yawn. Because all of those things are simply distractions. If you believe that the world is going to change based on who you elected, then we might be in trouble. And if you believe that the worst thing in the world is a regressive, someone, a member of the regressive left, or, Richard Spencer, right? The environment is collapsing around us, right? What are you doing about that? What are you doing about that? So, Alberto, you're asking me questions about Hillary. I don't know Hillary. Did I like Hillary? I don't know Hillary. If you want to know who I voted for, go watch some of my old videos. Go watch my videos from November of last year. You'll know all of that stuff, right? But that is, I hate to get on you, but dull. That is a dull conversation, right? A dull conversation to be talking about who we're voting for, right? Unless we're electing people based on a block of individuals who have a very particular agenda in mind. And by a block of individuals, I mean like a community assembly who have gotten together, thought about what is needed in their community to make changes in their very lives. And you're electing individuals that will create the space to have those conversations happening in the political arena in your community, right? But I'm sorry, the person who's president is not going to be the person that's going to be making those decisions about what happens on the corner from my street. My local council member is going to be having those, and my assembly person is going to be making those decisions, right? Maybe my representatives are going to have those things, right? And so the people that are having impacts on my life, y'all don't know them unless you live on my block. You don't know, and so it would be silly for me to have a conversation about Carlos Menchaca because you don't know Carlos Menchaca. I know Carlos Menchaca. And it's important for me to know Carlos Menchaca, but you need to know who is your elected official that's going to be making the decisions in your community, right? And do you have the base around you or around the issue to influence that person to make the right decision, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Veganista, first of all, thank you so much. Yup, grassroots. Yes. Good morning hello to everybody who has come in while I've been just running my mouth. So good news and good projects. So we have this piece, I have this piece that I'm hoping will be an education tool for people to learn about alternative economics, about cooperative economics, and also to understand how cooperative economics has been operating behind the scenes. Likely, if there are, positive programs that are happening in your community that are having a positive impact, somehow that work likely happened through some type of cooperative action in your community, but how to become more intentional about the types of collaboration that happen in your communities. Another great project that I'm getting started on is there is a group that's interested in an eco-village. There's a whole eco-village movement. Please do some research on the eco-village movement. I'm just learning about it myself, but I've been doing some research on, properties and things that are available in my area to see about, finding a site for the eco-village. If that takes off, I really do hope that takes off. I'm going to be carrying you all with me. I'm going to be taking you through the development of that eco-village process. Something else. So you guys all know that I am a volunteer for a cooperative, an organization that does cooperative development. I have been talking to so many people from the cooperative movement. You guys know I had a conversation with Jessica Gordon Nemhard, who wrote the book Collective Courage, which is I believe it's published by University of Pennsylvania Press, or Penn State University Press. Collective Courage, Jessica Gordon Nemhard. I usually put links down, so I'll include a link here, but if you look at some of my earlier videos, I've included links, or you can just look up Collective Courage. I spoke to some folks from the Democracy at Work Institute. I've been speaking to people at the New York City network of worker cooperatives. having conversations with them about like how to collaborate on this piece. The Center for Family Life, which has been doing cooperative development in Brooklyn, in New York City for over 10 years now. I've been having conversations with them about how to turn this piece of theater, this 360 experience. I don't know if it's even going to be a piece of theater by the time I don't know what it's going to be by the time it might be more like an amusement park by the time it's done. But to make sure that this tool is something that's going to be effective in figuring out where around the country. I've been talking to these folks at an organization called the Working World that does, they have a loan fund. If you're a cooperative, they can help you get equipment, and that's kind of an amazing thing. So I've been having some conversations with those folks. So that's amazing work that's going on. Also, I have been working with an amazing organization called Solidarity that has been trying to get access to clean and renewable energy, and now they have this initiative where they're going to try to meet 100% clean renewable energy in Highland Park, which is a community that is within, it's a city that's within the Detroit city limits, but that work, we're seeing it start to expand out. There's another initiative that's going to bring free internet to an entire community in Detroit. So like, what are you doing? Right? These aren't my initiatives. I just know that they're happening, and those are the things that make me excited. Those are the things that I want people to be talking about and sharing and getting involved in and finding ways to support, right? And the best way you can support a lot of these things is with your labor, right? And if you can't support them with your labor, you know, make a donation. Make a donation. So let's see what's going on. Your local government has more of an impact on your daily life than the president. Absolutely, Stephen Gerard. Thank you for that little bit of input. Redneck to Vegan says, I liked Bernie too, but he turned out to be a fraud. Dude should never have supported Hillary after what she did to him and us. Big F to all politics. Yeah, Redneck to Vegan says, also Solidarity, cool name. It is a cool name, and it's a cool organization. My favorite thing is when I go to board meetings at Solidarity, it's like the elders. It's like a council of elders. It's like all of these people who've been living in that community, primarily people of color. In fact, I think, yeah, primarily people of color. It actually might be an all person of color board. It actually is, I think it's an entire board of people of color who are doing amazing work in Sunset Park. And again, they're expanding that work throughout the city. So yeah, that's good news. So that's the good news on the tail end of all of this stuff. So we can talk about the past. I think it's important to understand the past, and I think it's important to understand the ways that people have tried to deal with the past, and to give people props for the work that they do in those areas, and to support the work that people are doing in those areas. Because if we don't acknowledge the past, then we don't, you know, I don't think we pay them, I don't think we pay the respect that we really should be paying to some of the work that people are doing. Because we don't understand that it's really helping to, you know, undo things that are foundationally wrong in our present society. Yeah. So I don't know, y'all. I hope that this was interesting I hope this was interesting. I did not prod y'all at all to come on and guest with me today, and it's very likely that over the next, you know, couple of months, because I'm not going to be making videos, this is also going to be the only time that I get to update you on stuff that's going on. So, is that a watershed map behind me? It's actually, it's a map of Napoleon's march to Moscow. And you can kind of see that, do you see where it's kind of thick and beige? That's the start. Basically, that's the start. So heading towards Moscow, you can see that it starts really thick and starts to get thinner and thinner and thinner, right? So that's how the troops were dwindling because of things like, you know, the winter. So it's a map over time and distance, right? So then they get to Moscow, and you can see they started out with almost 500,000 troops. By the time they got to Moscow, I think there were hunting troops, and then the skinny black line coming back, that's the troops. That's the troops coming back, right? And the little spurs are where like groups broke off and then they came back a different way. And so by the time they got back, it looks like there were 10,000 troops. So they left with 500,000 troops and returned with 10,000 troops. So yeah, no, you were way off, but I'm glad you asked about it because it's actually a really cool map in terms of uh, design, like information design, like how to present information. So you look at that and it's very clear if somebody tells you that these are the troops heading to Moscow and the thickness of the line is how many troops there were at the time. And then as you can see, you can barely see the little thin, little narrow line coming back. Yeah. And being from Florida, it looked like a sinkhole with a river. No, that's not what it is. Anyway, so thanks for that. Okay, also, I want to talk to you guys. So this is happening, right? So I believe the date is not the first Sunday in January. I think the first Sunday in January is like the 30th of December. So that's New Year's Eve. That's not going to happen. But by week 2, which I believe is the 7th of January, which will be Sunday the 7th of January, please have read chapter 1. And I would say read the forwarding material as well if you're interested, but because there's plenty of time. But then please have read chapter 1. It's not that much. The chapters are they're pretty slim, right? Right. So please have read chapter 1, and we're going to have our first discussion from Pedagogy of the Oppressed on Sunday, January 7th in the new year, because that's what I've been promising y'all. So we are getting in this. We're getting in this. And I'm hoping that this is going to frame some of our conversations as well, because a lot of the way that we talk about society, I think, is informed by the limited modes of communication that we have. So, Sternolai-Domastoid, I love the name. I'm not sure what it is. Says, what does it cover? This book is about, it's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and it's Paulo Freire's discussion of how we move from being a society of oppressors and oppressed people to a liberated society. It's just a pathway to liberation using education as the core, right? But it also just really explores the different modes of interacting with each other, right? So there are ways that we can interact with each other that are about, violence and exploitation, and then there are ways that are about cooperation and sharing. So yeah, I'm hoping that we can have that discussion against chapter 1. Please, chapter 1, y'all, who want to participate by January 7th. And so you have between now and then you have a month to read all the forwarding material. I imagine that many of you will have been able to read the book by then. Please do try to get a hold of it. I haven't been able to find a PDF of it online, but you can get, I believe, the first 3 chapters online. But do try to get a hold of it, and do try to read it. The first time I read it, I was like, huh? Because there's so many concepts that are being introduced. Because again, not used to thinking in that way, right? As far as I know, it's like you go to school, they open up your head, they fill it with information, and then you leave prepared for life, but not, right? And this is a very different way of thinking. Oh, is this like a book club? Yeah, it's like a study group. I'm calling it a study group, Tre Legal. So Veganista, I'll see. I hope your library has it. If your library doesn't have it, let me know if your library doesn't have it, because I would like to know that there's a library out there that doesn't have Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So that's it, y'all. I hope that you've enjoyed this. This was the rant that, again, I was going to make it as a video, but then I figure, hey, if I'm just going to sit down and talk to you all, I might as well do it with all y'all in the room so you can be able to respond to me and tell me I need to calm myself down. So we'll be back next week. Next week, as I said before, I'm going to be starting, in 2 weeks, we're going to be kicking off a great project with young people here in Brooklyn. So I'll be, if not making videos, at least posting updates, you know, sort of like I did with the Page to Stage from Ready, Set, Go Race. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, that's it. That's it for this video. Those of you who have been watching on YouTube, or those who will watch this on YouTube, like this video. If you like it, share, comment, subscribe. This is Reg signing off. Love yourselves. Peace.